Hello everyone, and welcome back to Translation Born, the series where we're taking a closer look at the translation of Bloodborne. I'd actually like to start out today by going back and re-examining the item name for something we've already picked up. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the antidote. Yes, in the previous episode I noted that I thought it basically had a pretty straightforward and solid translation, but while that's broadly true, there was one thing in particular that I wanted to go back and comment on now that I have a little bit more time. Specifically, the change I'd like to talk about is the one that's in the item name itself. In Japanese, the item name looks like this. Roughly translated, it would mean something like white pills, or even more literally, white medicinal tablets. And what I think's really interesting about this particular translation choice is the way it affects your ability to understand what the item does. If you're scrolling through a list of items and one of them says antidote, it's pretty clear to you what that's going to do. It's going to cure poison. You don't even really need the first line that says small medicinal tablets that counteract poison to tell you that. It's also very concise, although the translation white pills is still shorter than Molotov cocktail, so I doubt character limitations are a factor here. What it seems to boil down to is that antidote is fairly clear, while white pills is pretty vague. At least in the Japanese, it's fairly clear to the player that it's some sort of medicine. Remember that the most literal version of the item name is something more like white medicinal pellets. So it seems to me like the translation of antidote is a concession to gameplay here. And I think it's important to note that the official English translation does include phrases like small medicinal tablets and medicinal pellets. In the end, though, I do feel like there is a little bit of a trade-off being made here, because there is a specific Japanese term for the word antidote. That would be gedokuzai, and it's just about as clear as the English word antidote. Literally, the characters used to represent that word would mean something like solve poison prescription. And of course, games use variants of this word, but they're usually pretty close. So what practical difference does this make? Well, consider the second line of the item description. Used to treat ashen blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged old Yarnum long ago. The Japanese name really drives home the fact that these were medicinal tablets. Yes, you're using it to cure poison, but this is something that was primarily thought of as medicine. The English makes you aware of the item's medicinal use, but it highlights its ability to counteract poison. It's a subtle point, one that you could argue doesn't make much difference at all, but I still think it's interesting. Anyway, I'm going to cut a loading screen and see you back in the Hunter's Dream. And now that we have insight, the doll has come to life. Let's see what she has to say.
Hello, good hunter. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you. Honorable hunter, pursue the echoes of blood, and I will channel them into your strength. You will hunt beasts, and I will be here for you to embolden your sickly spirit.
Alright, let's keep talking.
Did you speak with Gehrman? He was a hunter long, long ago, but now serves only to advise them. He is obscure, unseen in the dreaming world. Still, he stays here, in this dream. Such is his purpose.
Anything else you'd like to say?
Ah, the little ones, inhabitants of the dream. They find hunters like yourself, worship and serve them. Speak words they do not, but still, aren't they sweet?
Alright, time to check for repeated dialogue.
Ah, they...
So, that repeats. What if I choose this? I get a message that says I can level up, and...
Very well. Let the echoes become your strength. Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes.
Okay, I think that's enough for now. What do you have to say if I leave, though?
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Okay, that was a lot of dialogue. And there's quite a lot to discuss here, too. But I'd like to start off with my favorite line, which is also the last one. May you find your worth in the waking world. Literally, the Japanese would translate to something like, may your awakening be a worthwhile or significant one. And I feel like the official version not only sounds a lot better, it's considerably more poetic, but it also emphasizes the idea that we don't belong in this dream. This is something of a theme in the game. We haven't seen a whole lot of evidence for this yet, but there is a note at the beginning of the game telling us to escape this dreadful hunter's dream. Time for a description though. Beckoning Bell. Great old bell discovered in the underground labyrinth. Its ring resonates across worlds, and the first hunter used it as a special signal to call hunters from other worlds to cross the gap and cooperate. A human must use insight to ring this uncanny bell, but the benefits of cross-world cooperation are many. That one's fairly straightforward. Now let's look at the next one. Silencing Blank. Hunters are linked by the resonance of bells with special encoded timbres. This inaudible burst disrupts such resonance. Fire to end cooperation and prevent further cooperation. Firing this does not disrupt the resonance of a sinister bell. Okay, that one's a little more interesting. First, note that the name would literally translate to resonance disrupting blank. Changing that to silencing seems like an inspired way around some character limitations to me. Second, and finally, the word blank being used in Japanese here is the same word you would use for firing blanks out of a regular gun. An interesting detail I never caught before. Now on to the next item. Old Hunter Bell. One of the resonating bells that cross the gaps of worlds. This bell is cracked and stained with the blood of beasts. A human must expend insight to ring this uncanny bell. The old hunters, who have long passed from the dream but cannot forget the feeling of the hunt, rely upon messengers to relay their thoughts. Ring the bell at their side, and they are certain to give a listen, for the night of the hunt is long and unchanging. This item features a number of great translation choices. A more literal rendering of that last block of lines would be, the old hunters who've lost the dream but cannot forget the hunt entrust their thoughts to the messengers. Ring the bell nearby and its sound is sure to reach them. The night of the beast hunt alone is unchanging. So the first thing that jumps out at me, especially given what I said earlier about the theme of wanting to escape the dream, is the shift away from the word lost. The official version has old hunters who have long passed from the dream, and I suspect that term is being used to bring to mind the idea of someone passing on, or dying. That's a connotation of the word lost in both languages, and we'll get a little more information later that might help support this particular reading. Next, note that the official translation highlights that they can't forget the feeling of the hunt. That's an addition, but I think it goes along with the drug theme I discussed earlier. Then there's the change from stating that the sound is sure to reach the hunters to the hunters are sure to give a listen, which I think is another great example of an atmospheric rewording of a phrase. Finally, there's the last line, for the night of the hunt is long and unchanging. This is a shift away from more literal, the night of the beast hunt alone is unchanging, but it's so evocative I feel that it's appropriate. And now finally the item description I'm looking at. Small resonant bell. Small bell discovered in the old underground labyrinth. Its ring resonates across worlds, and the first hunter used it as a special sign to call hunters from other worlds to cross the gap and cooperate. This bell resonates with its counterpart, the beckoning bell, ring to help hunters in other worlds. So there's an interesting quirk in the Japanese here. It seems to be referring to the beckoning bell by a different name. Literally, the line in question here would come out to something like, forms a pair with the hunter bell, or even more literally, the bell of beast hunting. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to leave in this next loading screen so that I can finish my point. Anyway, functionally, the game is referring to the beckoning bell. Those two items are used together, but a literal translation of that item name would actually come out to something like, bell that calls hunters. You can see why they went with beckoning bell instead. Anyway, I wonder if maybe the beckoning bell was once called the hunter bell and the Japanese in that instance never got updated, or if it has some significance to the lore. Either way though, now that I've awakened in Yusefka's clinic, it's time for me to advance her quest line a bit. The process can be kind of tedious though, so this is a short goodbye to regular speed video because we're going to do a little fast forwarding. Alright, and while we're moving ahead at double time, I'd like to get back to some of the interesting parts of the doll's dialogue. The first line I think is really worth mentioning is the one that has the official translation of, "You will hunt beasts, and I will be here for you, to embolden your sickly spirit." A more literal version of that line would be, "Hunt beasts, and above all, please use me for the sake of your will." So clearly there's a lot going on here. The first thing that I would note is the shift in subjects that happens in the official translation. "You will hunt beasts, and I will be here for you to embolden your sickly spirit." This, I think, makes sense because of the division in what's happening. We're the ones who are going to hunt, and when we use her, she's the one who's going to be manipulating the blood echoes. This is essentially a reference to leveling up after all, and that's how it works in this game. And actually, that's another point. One of the functions of this dialogue is clearly to let you know that you can use her to level up, and that's being conveyed very clearly in the English. She's already said that she'll make us stronger by channeling the blood echoes into our strength, and now she drives home the point by saying she'll be there to embolden our sickly spirit. Which brings us to the next thing I'd like to note. There's potentially a little bit of wordplay happening in the Japanese. When the doll tells us literally to use her for the sake of our will, the term being used in the Japanese is ishi. This is pronounced pretty much the same as the term ishi, or dying will, that's being translated as blood echoes. So it's kind of like she's saying, "I will use will to make you stronger, and please use me for the sake of your will." But remember that one term carries the connotation of death. So while I'm not sure how intentional this is, I think the use of the term sickly spirit is pretty appropriate here. Finally, I'd like to point out the clear tone of subservience that comes through in the doll's dialogue. In the literal version of that line, she's directly telling us to use her. This is compounded by the fact that in the Japanese, she uses honorific language with us. This is a good reason to have her say, "I will be here for you" in the English version. She's already said earlier that she's here in the dream to look after us, but I feel like the use of that line really adds something to the tone of the dialogue. It also further justifies the shift in subjects that I was talking about before. So the official translation clearly gets across the idea that you can level up with the doll. It references our sickly spirit, which may or may not be all that significant. It establishes the tone of the subservience of the doll, and I happen to think it also sounds really good. Certainly it fits in well with the overall atmosphere of the game. I think this is another example of a great localization. One line that I feel doesn't work quite so well, though, is in reference to Gehrman, where the doll says he is obscure, unseen in the dreaming world. A more literal version of that line might be, "Now he is obscure and hardly ever seen." And while that might seem pretty close, the next line is, "Still, he stays here in this dream, such is his purpose." And I think it's a little bit confusing to say that he's unseen in the dreaming world, but he stays here in this dream. It's a small point though, and we're done setting up Yosefka's new dialogue, so back to regular speed. Welcome back to regular gameplay, everyone. It's time to go up and get some more dialogues from Yosefka.
Ah, you are safe. Thank goodness. But I'm afraid nothing will change my mind. I cannot open the door. I'll do what I can, of course. Perhaps this will help you, if only in some small way. This night is long, but morning always comes. Someone of your caliber won't fail us, I am certain. And once the night of the hunt ends, we can speak face to face. Then I can finally see what you look like. I shouldn't be thinking this, but I am rather looking forward to it. So please, be careful out there.
Okay, that was nice, but what if I want to try and break down this door right now?
Stop!
What if I don't want to stop? What if I just want to break down the door?
Oh. Please, stop. It's beasts you hunt. Why are you behaving like one? This can't be the real you. Please, stop.
Okay, if you say so.
Are you calm again? Thank goodness. You mustn't let the hunt overcome you. Remember yourself. You are not a beast.
Okay, now what happens if I talk to you again?
I'm sorry. I have nothing else to offer you. I will pray for your safety. May light shine upon this night and your fortunes.
And there you have it. After you've used, I believe it's 4 Yusefka's blood vials and go back to her for refills, she changes her dialogue. Also, at any time, you can attack her door twice, and if you talk to her, she'll calm down again and continue to speak with you. If, on the other hand, you decide to attack her door a 3rd time, you'll get a different result. Let's see what happens.
You are no more than a beast. I should have known.
After that attack, she won't talk with you again, and there's no way you can interact with her. So, with that in mind, let's take a look back at some of the translation choices here. The first set of these new lines that really stands out to me is the one where she says, "And once the night of the hunt ends, we can speak face to face. Then I can finally see what you look like." A more literal version of that might be, "Once the night of the hunt ends, we won't have to talk through a door like this. I might even get to see your face." The official version cuts a little bit more to the chase with that first line. She goes straight to saying, "We can speak face to face." Then the next line takes that same idea and moves forward with it a little bit when she says, "Then I can finally see what you look like." And I think this is a pretty clever change that's happening here. In particular, I think the use of the phrase face to face, which both implies that we'll be talking without the door in the way, and incorporates the idea from the Japanese that she'll get to see our face, is really well done. It also stays true to the spirit of the lines, namely that Yusefka kind of likes us now and wants to see what we look like. Remember that she flat out tells us she's excited about this, which is actually the next line I'd like to talk about, where she says, "I shouldn't be thinking this, but I am rather looking forward to it." The first part of that line would more literally be something like, "Perhaps this is improper," a point I'll get back to after cutting this loading screen. Alright, the thing to really note there is the shift from "perhaps this is improper" to "I shouldn't be thinking this." But again, I feel like this is a change that's completely justified and very much in character. The idea is pretty much the same. She knows she probably shouldn't be as excited as she is to see us, but she's feeling that way anyway. So once again, overall I think this is a good set of translation choices, which is great because I think this is one set of lines that could have a really large impact on a player. It's one of the few interactions we've had that's just been straightforward and positive. But now it's time to switch gears a little bit and talk about this item description. Thick cold blood. A thick droplet of cold blood containing blood echoes, used to gain a larger amount of blood echoes. A strong will produces thick blood, doubtless the product of an obsession, a potent source of human strength. So for such a short description, there's actually a lot going on there. First, and perhaps most noticeable, is the line that in the official translation is, "A strong will produces thick blood." Remember how I was talking before about the 2 different versions of the word will that this game uses? There's dying will, which is translated as blood echoes, and there's also just the regular word will. And in this case, with the line, "A strong will produces thick blood," the term being used is for dying will. Literally, the line would translate to, "A strong dying will gives birth to thick cold blood." This is, to a certain extent, an example of the consequences you can run into when you've already translated an important term in a certain way. Oh, and incidentally, since I'm leveling up here, I just thought I would let everyone know that I'm going to be going for a Strength Arcane build, which is something I've never tried before, so hopefully it works out. But back to what I was saying before. I feel like the English translation does lose something here by not having the term for will be exactly the same as the term for blood echoes. While you can't really mess around with the term blood echoes though, there's an alternative that you could try. I'll get to that after this cut. So, as I was saying, there's one thing that you could do to try and make the connection between blood echoes and will in that line be a little bit clearer. Namely, you could try and change what you do with the translation of will. For example, you might render the first part of that line, "A will that echoes strongly in death produces thick blood." That would be an attempt to spell out the connection between the 2 terms. The problem is, even if you were able to have an effective explanation there, it would eat into the limited amount of characters available. You would have to change the translation of the line, "Doubtless the product of an obsession, a potent source of human strength." That aspect of the line is important as well. Madness, mania, and obsession are key sources of strength for us in this game. Remember, for instance, that Madman's knowledge is how we gain insight. So in a way, it boils down to what you want to emphasize. This is the kind of choice or trade-off you have to make a lot in translation. But I think it's time we talk with this girl again.
Are you that hunter? Can you look for my mum?
Yes, we will.
Really? Oh, thank you. My mum wears a red jeweled brooch. It's so big and beautiful. You won't miss it. Oh, I mustn't forget. If you find my mum, give her this music box. It plays one of Daddy's favourite songs. And when Daddy forgets us, we play it for him so he remembers. Mum's so silly running off without it.
Anything else I should know?
My mum wears a red jeweled brooch. It's so big and beautiful. You won't miss it. Oh, and if you find her, give her this music box. Please, I know you can do it.
Okay, most of that translation was pretty straightforward. She did just give us an item though, so we're going to take a look at that before we get back to the few points I'd like to make. Tiny music box. A small music box received from a young Yharnam girl. Plays a song shared by her mother and father. Inside the lid is a small scrap of paper, perhaps an old message. 2 names can be made out, however faintly, Viola and Gascoigne. Alright, so one of the points I wanted to make about the little girl's dialogue is actually something that's shared in the description of this music box. But since I'm about to warp back to the lantern, I'm going to cut a loading screen first. Okay, so the line from the item that I wanted to talk about is the one that says, plays a song shared by her mother and father. And the line from the little girl is, it's one of Daddy's favorite songs. Now, obviously those lines don't seem to have a whole lot in common, but they're both used to point out the significance of the music box and the song it plays to the little girl's parents. And in the Japanese, there's a common phrase that's being used to refer to that idea. That would be omoide no kyoku. Translated literally, it would be something like a song of memories. Its use makes it quite clear that this song is one of fond reminiscence for the girl's parents. And in the context of the dialogue, this works very well with the idea that playing the song for Gascoigne helps him remember his family after he's forgotten them. But, as you'll probably have noticed, in the official translation, this phrase is never directly translated. A literal version of those 2 lines would be something like, Mum says it's one of Daddy's favorite songs, that it holds fond memories for him, for the dialogue, and apparently it plays a song of fond reminiscence for the girl's mother and father, for the item description. But the important thing is, the English version does convey to the player the idea that this is an important song to both Viola and Gascoigne. In the dialogue, because we learn both that this is one of Gascoigne's favorite songs, and the fact that playing the song will help him remember himself and his family when he forgets them, we can see how much it means to him. And I feel like the item description is brilliantly phrased. Simply saying that it's a song shared by the girl's mother and father is very evocative. But now it's time to fight the first boss of this playthrough. Its official English name is the Cleric Beast, which is pretty spot on if you ask me. Literally, the characters would be something like Beast of One Who Does Holy Work. But the part of that I'm translating as one who does holy work is a standard word for clergyman or cleric in Japanese. But just to get back briefly to the point I was making before I entered this fight, sometimes the best way to translate something is to not include a literal phrase, but to internalize the sense of that phrase into the other lines that you're using. Similarly, sometimes it's better to get at the idea of what's being said or conveyed in the source language and then reword it in the target language as opposed to providing a simple literal translation. The little girl's dialogue actually has a great example of this just before she gives us the music box, when she says, "Oh, I mustn't forget." The Japanese there would literally be something like, and. Although a pretty basic translation would also be something like, "Oh, and one more thing." She's kind of stalling for time as a way to give you more information. Also, as you can probably tell from my more basic translation, the idea is that she's just thought of something else that she should tell you. Rather than sticking with a basic translation, though, the official version takes a reading of the information that I just gave you and reinterprets it into a new phrase in English. The result is, "Oh, I mustn't forget," which is a very believable way of communicating the fact that she's just thought of a little bit more information that she wants to tell us, but hasn't fully formulated the words to actually tell us the information. Arguably, it's also phrased in such a way as it would be believable to hear coming from a relatively young girl. And it's translations like these that really get to the heart of the idea of translating sense for sense. In fact, here's another example entirely in English. This message, this "you hunted," is actually completely different in the English version. So now I'm going to cut over to the end of that same fight, except in the US edition of the game. As you can see, the message this time is "prey slaughtered." But now back to the Japanese version. So clearly the localization team felt like "you hunted" was a little bit too Englishy. "Prey slaughtered," on the other hand, still gets across the idea that you're a hunter hunting your prey, and I think sounds a lot more natural in English. I also feel like it does a good job of tying in with the themes of the game. But since we just got a new item, I'm going to take a look at that description. Sword Hunter Badge. One of the badges crafted by the Healing Church. The silver sword is a symbol of a church hunter. Ludwig was the first of many Healing Church hunters to come, many of whom were clerics. As it was, clerics transformed into the most hideous beasts. And with that fairly standard translation out of the way, I'm going to head back to the Hunter's Dream, so I'm going to cut another loading screen. Alright, so when I say that I feel like "prey slaughtered" fits with the themes of the game, I'm specifically interested in the kind of ruthlessness it involves. As a hunter, it's your job to root out and kill these beasts. And as terrifying as they can be, you're actually the one that poses the biggest threat to them. To kill them, you have to control your emotions, both your fear and your compassion. You also have to try not to lose yourself to the seductive thrill of the hunt. Remember Yusefka's dialogue from earlier when we were attacking her door. And I think "prey slaughtered" really plays into those ideas quite well. Time for another item description, though. Hunter Chief Emblem. A cloth emblem that belonged to the captain of the church hunters long ago. Opens the main gate that leads to the round plaza of the great cathedral. The main gate is shut tight on nights of the hunt, and could only be opened from the other side with this emblem. In other words, the captain's return, and this emblem, determined the end of the hunt. Alright, and we also have access to a new weapon, so let me read that description as well. Kirkhammer. A trick weapon typically used by Healing Church hunters. On the one side, an easily handled silver sword. On the other, a giant obtuse stone weapon, characterized by a blunt strike and extreme force of impact. The Church takes a heavy-handed, merciless stance toward the plague of beasts, an irony not lost upon the wielders of this most symbolic weapon. So the translation for the Hunter Chief Emblem is fairly straightforward. The Kirkhammer has a number of points I'd like to discuss, but for now I'll just say that I really like the name. Literally it would translate to the Church's Stone Hammer, but using Kirk to mean church and inserting it right into the name is a great touch. Let's take a look at this new item though. Repeating Pistol. Repeating pistol typically used by Healing Church hunters. Crafted with mostly metal parts exhibiting a complex design, the repeating pistol fires 2 shots at once, making it a ravenous consumer of quicksilver bullets. Should be used sparingly compared to its workshop counterpart, as the trump card in one's arsenal. Alright, and once again I'd like to focus on the name of this item. The term that's being translated as repeating pistol here in the Japanese is Rensoju, and from what I understand, it's something of an unusual term. A more common word is Renso-ho, which is used to refer to twin-mounted cannons or naval guns. Arguably a more literal translation of this item would be double-barreled pistol, and it does fire 2 shots at once, not one right after the other. But on to the next item description. Sinister Resonant Bell. A blood-stained bell discovered in the old underground labyrinth. One of the resonating bells that cross the gaps of worlds, but this one knells for misfortune and malice. The sinister bell is an object of dark thoughts. Ring it to become the enemy of a hunter in another world. This item name would more literally translate to something like Resonating Bell of Misfortune. Considering its use in allowing players to fight other players though, I feel like this is a great translation choice. So, now that we've taken a look at all those items, it's time to go talk to Gilbert again. After all, he told us to go to the Great Bridge to the Cathedral Ward, and it was blocked off. So I'll see you for that after the cut. Alright Gilbert, what do you have to say about this blocked off bridge?
Yes, I see. But the Great Bridge is the only way to the Cathedral Ward. And during the hunt, the bridge is closed. You could try the aqueduct. There's a rather, how shall I put it, colourful area south of the Great Bridge. From there, an aqueduct leads to the Cathedral Ward. Not a place you'd normally want to visit, but I don't imagine you have much of a choice, do you?
And let's check for repeated dialogue.
An aqueduct leads from the town south of the main bridge to the cathedral ward. Not a place you'd normally choose to visit, but not much of a choice with the bridge closed.
Okay, so there are a couple interesting things from that dialogue. First, I think the translation does a great job with the line, "There's a rather, how shall I put it, colorful area south of the Great Bridge." A literal version of that line would be something like, "The area south of the Great Bridge is, how can I say this, not very good." So I really like the way that the word colorful is actually being used as a euphemism. I think it fits the spirit of the line quite nicely. But one thing we do lose from the Japanese version of the dialogue that comes a little bit later on is the focus on us being a foreigner. A more literal version of the last few lines of Gilbert's dialogue there would be, "Normally, it's not a place outsiders would enter, but this could be the perfect chance for you, don't you think?" Compare that to, "Not a place you'd normally want to visit, but I don't imagine you have much of a choice, do you?" So in the English, I feel like you get a stronger emphasis on this being an unpleasant area. The Japanese has a bit of an overtone of this being about you being a foreigner. Interestingly, this is the reverse of what happened when we looked at one of Gilbert's dialogues earlier. Remember the line translated as, "Yharnam has a special way of treating guests," compared to the more literal, "Yharnamites are all gloomy or unpleasant." So in a way, the larger context of this dialogue actually balances out. And you can see another example of this in the same lines we got when we talked to him just a minute ago. Another difference you may have noticed is that the English has the phrasing, "but you don't have much choice," while a more literal version of the Japanese was, "This could be the perfect chance for you." But when you talk to Gilbert the second time, remember when I checked for repeated dialogue, a literal version of his last line then would be, "With the Great Bridge closed, I imagine you don't have much choice." And there the translation is, "Not much of a choice with the bridge closed." So while it's not exactly the same situation as we saw before, the two translations do kind of even out in the end. But now it's time to fight another boss, so enjoy the intro cutscene.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
And I'm switching video footage here because I forgot he gives you unique dialogue if you lose to him. So this is an alternate version of the fight where we're deliberately going to lose so that he can say this set of lines.
Too proud to show your true face, eh? But a sporting hunt it was.
So if you didn't quite catch that, the English lines were, "Too proud to show your true face, eh? But a sporting hunt it was." A more literal version, by contrast, would be, "Humph, pretending to be human right up to the end, eh? Still, it was a thrilling hunt." So obviously the first line is pretty different there, but I'll talk more about that when we get back to the real fight. Alright, so in terms of the contrast between the two lines, this is the kind of change we've seen before. The core idea is that Gascoigne thinks we're beasts masquerading as humans. In the Japanese, he calls this out literally, while in the English he does it by implication, "Too proud to show your true face." But hang on, I think he has something to say.
What's that smell? The sweet blood. Oh, it sings to me. It's enough to make a man sick.
Alright, and to finish the point I was making before, I think the translation does a great job of capturing what's at the core of the Japanese. I'm actually more interested in the translation of the second line. In the translation, he says, "What a sporting hunt it was." In the Japanese, the word he uses is tamaranu, and in this context, it basically means something you can't get enough of. Actually, the same term gets used in the mid-fight dialogue when he says, "The sweet blood, oh it sings to me." Tamaranu is being translated there as sweet. And I think the point of the line he's saying when he kills you is to show you that he's kind of been overtaken by the thrill of the hunt. Remember again Yosefka's dialogue about us becoming a beast. This is what's happened to Father Gascoigne. And in the end, I'm not sure how well the word sporting gets that across. Of course, it doesn't help that you can generally barely hear him deliver that second line. On the other hand, I feel like the mid-fight dialogue had an incredible translation that helps convey that point. Time for one more item description though. Erden Tomb Key. Key to the gate that blocks the tomb of Erden. Beyond the tomb, Erden Chapel can be found in the center of the cathedral ward. Only today the church is abandoned, and some say that the residents of Erden have all gone mad. This translation is pretty straightforward, although I will say that the Japanese odon is much easier to say than Erden. There are going to be a few terms in the English translation that I'm going to have a hard time saying out loud, so I apologize for my pronunciation here and again in the future. And finally, after a brief celebration, I'd like to talk about one more thing related to Father Gascoigne. That is, if you're like me and are unfamiliar with UK expressions, you might have been wondering what shop he was talking about when he said beasts all over the shop. In fact, that's just an expression that means all over the place. And that's going to bring this episode to a close. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to leave them. Thanks for watching, everyone.